Good evening. I'm quite happy to be involved and to be asked and to talk with you and to go through this uh, for a few reasons. The forum of interested folks. It's a bit of a forcing function. It's created a bit of an overview of our position in the market, of what we've been trying to do, why we're doing it, and I was personally, I thought it was very helpful when I was a participant in last month's meeting and got to see the similar kind of thing from Steve Kao at BC Hydro. And if you put the data, you'll definitely see a difference. But that's the point. So I'll get to introduce yourself a little bit. That title is how you titled the session. And it's appropriate. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 16 years of age, and um, didn't know it so much then, but it's a way, if you will. It's just a way and an approach, and hopefully something that brings good in the world. Okay, so vehicle X, little background. So how does this entrepreneur get involved in this? Because I'm not a technology person per se. I'm not certainly not an energy person. And I get involved in it because I was trying to fill a need. And again, that's back to the entrepreneur a little bit, or my approach is fill a need. And it was the need of our own company was how to be able to afford to transition our entire fleet of tour buses, West Coast sightseeing tour buses, to electric. And we had about 60 buses. With electrics, you'd only need 50, partly because they're on the road more often. And that doesn't necessarily imply that they're only the best and they always work. It just suggests that the stuff we were using wasn't on the road very as often. So we'd need 50. And we did buy two 8 years ago. And, to show that we're serious, but to learn about it, to see how they really work within an organization. And as you know, imagine these are business people here. Until you have, there's something new and you need the experience. But we could see that we couldn't afford to transition our fleet. And I'll end with this part of the introduction by saying, enter Steve Kao. And he said to me on the phone one day, Rob, I'd need 40 electric tour buses for my V2G program at a particularly constrained substation. And I immediately said, that's great, Steve, because I need 50 and there's 40 of them I don't use in the winter. And he said, well, that's when I want them because we're winter peaking. So that's the germ of it. What's the spark of this? The need, and then Steve with the solution. Okay. I wouldn't mind. I will just, by the way, so you get trained here, I will ask, are there any questions before I turn any slide? All right. I'll do it very quickly. No questions? We're okay? All right. This is what I'm going to go through. So I'll speak to these things a little bit, some more than others, that you can read the points that are made. But this is an important thing to do, to have electric vehicles, more of them on the road, especially fleets, medium heavy duty. They are 40% of the pollution, even though they make up 3% of the fleets, of the number of vehicles, sorry. And having lower pollution, and we'll get into that kind of thing. But this is important in many areas. I learned to operate under the triple bottom line, which means we put KPIs, we measure people, planet, and profit KPIs, and they all sort of work amongst each other. But this very complete in that way, the electrification of fleets and vehicle grid integration, VGI. I think I mentioned all of you are already somewhat up to speed, of course, but I'll use VGI or V2G, V2H are the ones we work in. Okay. And you can see that this was side of desk. I say 6 years. Side of desk work for me as the owner of CEO of West Coast Sightseeing Tour Bus Company and V2X Courier in Vancouver. And however, sold the tour bus company last year, and this had been growing, become most of my desk and center of desk. This is what I do is help others be able to transition their fleets to reduce pollution and make grids more resilient. Okay. So I'll just say, are there any questions? And you can do that, and then you can give me the thumbs up or down, and I'll move on. All right.
Move on.
We show this slide just because I think it's cute that when people read up here V2G, V2G, and then down here we have vehicle to the grid. So it's kind of self-explanatory, and we'll get into why it's important. Because the world needs more power, more and more power. Always has, always will, and it's accelerating for reasons you can read about, some of it to do with AI, the power needs for those plants. Of course, more and more electric vehicles is another thing, but the world needs more power. And I told you already about the financial constraint. That's a problem. Anybody with 3-5 vehicles up to thousands, I mean, as far as that goes, it's to convert what you have now or the existing ICE vehicles to electric is just too expensive. And you'll see that. I can talk more about that later too. And then, I've been involved in the green journey since I got religion in 2002. I still don't know what a ton. If it does, just let me know. It doesn't mean anything to me. Does, and I don't have my bag right here, but I carry around a portable air quality monitor. It's called Atmo, ATMO. They're not cheap, but I carry it around to learn about the air quality, outdoor, indoor, different buildings, restaurants. A couple of restaurants I went to were terrible. I'll never go back. The air quality indicator was at like 12 out of 100. I won't go back. They have bad ventilation, et cetera, et cetera. So pollution is the bigger problems. Not to say that it's a competition, but I think the awareness of polluted air brings it home to you today, to your family, to people to your family, to your kids. It makes it personal, put it that way. Okay. This is another thing that Steve Ko sent me, and I don't know if I hope he'll ask a question or say something, but or listen to it at some point. But this is another gift I got from Steve. He shared with me a Department of Energy report. I think it's 3 years ago now, at least. And this was one of the graphs, and it looks pretty self-explanatory. But in the States, there's up to, what do we think, 28 billion, 22 billion of stationary storage, the gray bars today. And however, in 25 as well, there was all this power sitting in electric cars, the red cars, 4 times or 5 times more. So, solution, we need power to play. It's being stored. Okay. This one I love. use the power available. You know, I could, after I explain this, I could say we don't need more power. We actually don't. We just need to use it better. Use what we have better. And that's what smart charging, which means you don't charge when there's peak, essentially. Um, and vehicle to grid will solve that problem. In this study in the UK, instead of needing 25 more gigawatts by 2050, they would need 26.5 gigawatts less than they produce today. So do we really need more power? Um, this one's interesting, and no one's asked me the sources and all that, but we didn't make it up. I will have to know that better in the future. So, comparatively, one can argue that the vehicle to grid, the cost of that kilowatt to a utility when and where they need it is the cheapest than other programs, other sources, that kind of thing, for the 3 reasons at least there and more. It's in town, the battery's already been bought by the bus company, or maybe it was subsidized in a contract with the utility, but it's not used only for giving power to the grid like stationary storage. BC started doing stationary storage, and we want to give power in V2G every day. It takes every day, all year round, so that the grid at mass can start to depend on it and consider it part of the utility. That's something we'll talk about in a bit. A part of the utility, which it's not today. Where was I going with that? Let me see. Part of the utility, cheapest. Lost my chain of thought.
The last slide and this slide is excellent information. I've been gung ho on V2G because I see the opportunity of less batteries, because you're now using the battery that's not driving the EV to help the utility. Tremendous advantages. So to see the cost comparison is really helpful.
Intuitively and otherwise, empirically, it does make sense. Okay? I speak to many people, do you have an electric car? I have for a while. People that don't typically say, well, once, twice, 5 times a year I go to Kelowna from Vancouver, so I don't want to stop and hope for an hour. It's not a valid argument, except that they don't know how to charge when they're in hope. But then I say, well, do you think you'd get one if, when there was a blackout, you could keep the lights on for 3 to 5 days in your house? Sold. They just go, I'm getting one. I said, well, we're not doing it yet, but it will. So interesting. That's a motivator, and people that have the money are early adopters. Just that's a key feature. And a battery that costs a lot of money you might put in your garage as backup is going to be like 5 or 10 kilowatt hours. So that's a day, and it's a lot of money, thousands of dollars sitting there, being used maybe hardly ever, if ever. And but cars are anywhere from 60 to kind of, let's say, 90 kilowatt hours for the most part. And school buses 250 kilowatt hours, tour buses 350 to 500 kilowatt hours. So those are pretty big batteries. Yeah. Depending on the homes, depending on the weather, a lot of things, it doesn't take a lot of buses to supply a whole community. It just doesn't. And This one I found quite interesting. I think I can use my cursor. If you look at the current electricity system on the left and what they predict on the right, the thing that's added at every level, the transmission, distribution, and customer level is storage. That's the only consistent thing that's added in all three. So we need to have it everywhere. I mean, it's not vehicle storage and no stationary storage. It's both, but it's storage. And as I said, the V2X is grid scale. That's the thing to imagine. So maybe I'll talk about this for a moment. If I can feel like an employee at an IBM conference in the 80s, right? So, IBM or 70s would have said, no, we just need one computer. And there's this guy in another story, Bill Gates, saying, no, we want a computer on every desk. Well, that's what the vehicle grid integration is facing right now. Utilities are so good at what they do, and we're pretty lucky part of the world, the quality or the security we get with power. But it's almost anathema to think, well, how am I going to deal with millions of sources, managing, communicating, and depending on millions of sources of power every day? It's a head shaker for 99.9% of them. And yet again, you've identified and found, there are these people like the Steve Kaos of the world and people now more and more within that organization that are making this happen. But most people don't know about it, and it threatens their livelihood, their everything. So that's the real challenge here, is change management. And that's where you and I come in, okay? Change management. Any questions?
Nope.
Timing is important. As someone who's started companies, purchased and built businesses, that kind of thing. When I look back, there were a couple things where the timing was magnificent, and I maybe didn't know it so much at the time, but the timing of an is really, really important. You can be, riding a pretty big wave, getting crushed by a wave, or trying to paddle up the back. Being at the right place of the wave range is really important. And with vehicle grid integration, this is now. This is now and coming forward, not 5 years ago even, or 10 or 15 years ago, even though a lot's been done. But just some examples, there's a storied research lab in the States that did the research on, what if the school buses are all electric, or when they are, what that means. There's a thing I recommend for those interested called V2, I think it's V2G Hub, and it's based in the UK, and it's an information repository for anybody who submits a trial, has done a test, that kind of thing, been reported on. There's over 157 last glance, and you can just see what people have been done. Many of this work for more than 10 years, these trials, etc. We're like operating successfully for 10 years. This is really key. Not my world, but oops, push, you can't do that wrong. I clicked. So Task 53 and the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, we are becoming members of Task 53. BC Hydro, Quebec Hydro just signed on. And they're amazing. It's European, started there, but it's to work on the interoperability, which for this to really work and to go at scale, that's the key. So there are groups out there and signing on to get this to the point that it's acceptable. Like right now, in this look at energy you. If you want to do vehicle to home with them, they've got it all set up. You buy your vehicle, and then you buy the charger and software that they supply you. And then they help arrange, or you phone somebody to get it installed. Okay, well, what if 3 years later you buy a Volvo? Now what? And the other guy you're selling it to, he's already got a charger. So that's not interoperability. That won't help scale things, but doesn't hurt in the meantime. When we did the test, which I'll show a little bit, 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, it was really hard to get a bus, a bidirectional bus. It was really hard to find and then get a bidirectional charger. In the software, nothing worked well together. Nothing played well together. But now there are more OEMs, more hardwares, more operating systems. The one we did in BC, we didn't try and reinvent the wheel. We used the components, the OEM bidirectional charger and software of an up and running system in California. Because that wasn't our goal. Our goal wasn't to reinvent the world. It was to help the utility understand the performance. So we found this. It says CAO's in the waiting room. Do I click? I did. I guess he's my boss here. We find this, it's always important, if this was almost empty and there was just us in there, you'd say, well, how come no one else has this figured out or interesting? The key is this is such a huge pending market. You're going to need players, small and large, and then they'll be the best will continue. But the benefit is, in the meantime, everyone's getting more electric vehicles and the air is cleaner and all that kind of thing. So there are folks out there, and I can already see there's one or two missing from this. Okay, I pressed something and now it's not. Let's see, that worked. Okay. So market drivers, stress, the utilities, and more complication already with the utilities with wind and solar. I mean, I imagine it's not as easy as the dam. And because I've been at this about 22 years now, this last one, the trend, I keep doing that. It's more of an acceptance that, and whether the pace of environmentalism, green or reducing footprint is slowing or accelerating, it's still growing. It's not going the other way. Okay. I mentioned it's such a big market, certain things you can look at locally to start. America, one of the groups that has been doing this, and I have huge respect for them, is NUWVE. They're based in San Diego, and I look forward to it. I'm going to meet them in about 10 days. But they started in 2010. And when I talked earlier about the timing, well, definitely too early for, building then, but they're still here now and they have IP, they have great people, they've done some of the best projects. So I hope they'll continue to be an important player moving forward. As I said, there'll be many more groups. That's not quite right. That's supposed to say vehicle fleets and home owners. Okay. Mainly vehicle fleets because they have predictable schedules. There are a lot of fleets that have predictable schedules and low duty cycle. I'm thinking with current batteries, at least 1/3 of all fleets could be applicable for this. There's a bunch too that they like transit. We've done the studies, talked to transit, worked with Go Ahead London actually on it, and those buses are out, almost all of them, from early to late, and they switch the driver. They don't retire the bus and park it. They switch the driver. So you want the opposite end of the schedule where someone like a school bus can go 250, 300 kilometers on full charge, but only goes 50 to 80 in a day. So it comes back to base with a strong state of charge. And some of the Amazons, Perlators, UPS, FedExes of the world, they know how distance, how far that truck goes within 90% every day, and often it's just not that far. So they don't need to be delivering and picking up from as many as they can. And homeowners, I think what we're doing, we really focus on fleets because it just made so much sense. You can contract with them. It's my background, and to be a real solution for these companies. And I'll show you an example of that. But the IP, and I'll get to that in a minute. The IP that we're working on and developing is leapfrogging some of the IP that's out there already. Will leapfrog, and that part with can and will be very important for homeowners as well. We won't have an aggregator role, what's our aggregator role with homeowners because the OEMs will pitch it, they'll sell it, they already are, and but the piece that is between the energy and the utility, or the battery and the utility, that controller has been identified as very important in all situations. Okay, this looks rather. I want to have music playing when this comes. There's that piece I mentioned, something between like all the amazing companies that are being developed. This component, this controller in between, is what was identified by the work we did years ago. It's kind of a summary here. Their report, these three main areas, but what it said is, what does it need for this to go to scale? Well, they need that's meant to say control and they're something that helps everything work together. Sing the sound, the doo-doo-doo-doo, that was the handshake between the two machines, and with the fourth community, yes, now we can talk. All the wires in the machine, big bag of bones without that controller. And that's a little bit like that here. Okay. Just looking at phases at the highest level, before phase one, there's research, if you will, research and testing. My view is that that will continue, but it's substantively proven. And now it's just things like the standards and whatever. Okay. So, for all the reasons we mentioned, these groups see it coming forward, move it coming forward, and they're competitive about it, by the way. That's what I've found by talking. They're a little bit competitive, which is good. They see it. I mentioned to the head of GM in Canada that I got to meet him at a conference ago, and I said, I think this as a feature, being able to keep your house online or with electricity for 3 to 5 days, or being able to get get revenue by supplying power back when and where. I think that feature might trump heated seats or the choice of rims you get. Just something a little more substantial. So they're the OEMs and everywhere are bringing this out. They may not be expanding their electrical fleets at the moment, but they're making this part of it. So we put together some of the best people we could find who know how to do this, have done this, and work with. Phase two is, okay, well, let's get a number of fleets that go less than 150 kilometers a day on this. We haven't found that to be difficult, and we're preparing to do that well and to be able to do that quickly when the time comes. And the big motivation as a fleet owner is, well, is it going to cost me less than what I'm using now? And initially, it's got to be substantively less. It can't be, like a diesel school bus is, I'm going to get this backwards, probably $210,000 in Canada, and a natural gas one is $200,000. So there's $10,000 there, and then there's a little bit in the fuel. For fleet owners to start to get the scale and take this on, they're taking a risk. They don't. They want it for good reasons, but they also know they're taking a risk in doing this. So the delta or what's going to motivate them to be bigger than that $10,000, especially for the first folks. And then let's scale. I mean, I think the main thing is it's grid scale. So in a moment you'll go, well, why not? These are some of the folks we work with. I really have to champion Jeff and Christopher initially, because they have such expertise in this area. They bring so much value. Jeff and Steve, I believe, is on the line, and he could speak more to this if people have questions. But being able to go to a utility and saying, look, it looks like there's a need for you here, or going to be a need for you here. You're kind of at your peak in handling that neighborhood. Well, guess what? We, by knowing that, we can go in those communities and identify the fleet owners, and then you've got a need for X, it looks like, and we've got a solution for X or 2X. That's vehicle to grid. So to be able to put that kind of information together reasonably easily is phenomenal. Christopher Ralph, I met when he was at Lion Electric. Before that, he was at Hydro Ottawa, but he was in charge for 4 years at Lion of their making sure their vehicles perform bidirectionally. So he knows that side of it from the vehicles, and then he's been involved in 6 implementations in America, setting up V2G programs, and he now works at Nordistello, another engineer, and responsibility to grow this part of their business. They usually do very big projects, but you got to start somewhere. Brian Taylor joined about a year ago. And it's hard to describe Brian, except that everyone loves him and loves working with him, and he's able to move things forward and get them done. He and his heart is in sustainability and environment. Okay. There's people we talk to, work with, contract with. There's a number of names you'll recognize there. We have an MOU across Canada, when it says customers, with all the major tour bus companies, Halifax, Toronto, Victoria, Vancouver, and to continue with that project of that up the buses with their large batteries in the off season, especially going to constrained substations. So just thought I'd mention that. So this is a summary of partnership between these three groups. And what I'll do is I'll map some of what we're doing onto this project, if you will, or a project like this. So this is obviously in the United States. Sunrun is a very large public company. I think they're the largest and storage or battery storage aggregated in the States. And they've, again, it's good when you have large groups doing it. Yeah, that there's a future in this kind of battery storage. So in they worked with BG&E and Ford. So if you mapped us on, it would be Fuse Power on the top, and then there would be BC Hydro in this locally, and then BYD. So far, it's been BYD, and it was Lion and BYD, and there are others coming forward, bigger brand. So, and part of it is it's not been easy to, as I said, get the bus or get the car. It still is early days. And a lot of the cars, for instance, you can get them in bi-direction. I mentioned GM Energy. You can't get them yet in Canada for this. They're not turned on for it. The system isn't there. The marketing, whatever, they're not turned on. So, a lot of our work has been get the charger, get the people together, who are the experts, that kind of thing, do the work in behind it. So with some of the work we're doing now, you could say, okay, change the word Sunrun for Fuse. So this was their timeline. This is, I think you might go, wow, that's pretty interesting. So a year and a half ago, they did the V2H pilot. I like to say I'm too old for pilots. We don't do those anymore. Just keep it going. And I hope they didn't do it for, those months and then stop doing V2H, but it looks like it, doesn't it? And it went the next step, doing vehicle to grid, and where three of them, they had way more capacity than a house could use. So, no, each one, I'm sorry, giving that much back every day. So I haven't done it yet, but if I took 20 kilowatt hours and multiplied it by the number of vehicles in British Columbia and maybe just applied a 50% or a 30% multiple to that, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? The future.
Well, about a year ago when I looked, ICBC indicated 3.9 million vehicles in BC. So you can start your math.
Someone there wants to do that. He's probably writing it down. I hope so. If he's not, he's going to hear it from me soon enough. So I think that's, and so we are, we are doing some work in the vehicle to home. And our plan before I saw this was, well, first we'll get 10 of them in homes. And then once that's up and running, then we'll start to, put together the vehicle to grid part. So that's kind of the way it goes, looks like. Ours though would say June to September, pick up, okay, 2026. And then it would say October 26 to the future for V2G. There wouldn't be a gap and put away. It would just keep growing. Who brought what, essentially, what was involved, and they're about this, they're never had to negotiate with, talk with the utilities before they started getting electric vehicles. So there's so many more players now in all of this. Yeah. And then, yeah, there was payment, making it worthwhile to the households. Um, Again, I'll take two or five of them and multiply hundreds of thousands, millions and go, why not? It works. Um, and something that's going to happen in 26 is, if people in the audience know a little or a lot about the solar industry, it was for a couple of decades before it took off. But when did it take off? It took off around '09 when the first contracts for feed-in tariffs were implemented in Ontario. And Ontario, for a brief amount of time, had the largest solar arrays in the world because they had contracts. So what I'm saying is contracts, for V2G, vehicle grid integration, if it is a lower cost or a low cost source of power when and where you need it, that seems good for ratepayers, good for everybody. And again, not to mention the clean roof. So, thank you.
Excellent.
So it was 36.6 terawatt hours.
Did you hear him?
I didn't quite, sorry.
36.66 terawatt hours. See?
Oh, thank you. I read it. 36.66.
I assume 3.9 million vehicles at 23.5 kilowatts per hours, right, per day. And then you multiply that. I use a 40% usage rate. So that's based on 40% of that number. So that was 36,666,000 kilowatt hours. So you do the math, that's 36.66 terawatt hours, right? So
Thank you. What's your background?
And that's a 40% usage rate.
What's your background?
I'm a mechanical engineer, or was retired mechanical engineer.
Okay,
so.
Thank you. Does that seems like a big number? Seems like
Seems big. Seems off.
Now, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Is there any doubt that that can happen? I didn't say when.
I don't have a doubt in it. I look at it this way. If there is a financial incentive for people to sign up either for a couple hours during peak hours when they're not driving anyways, right? People will sign up for it if it's going to cut their electrical bill. So they spent X number of dollars getting the vehicle and then they're getting revenue back from it. I'm sure a lot of people will be signing up for that. It just comes down to is how much is the hardware going to cost and who's paying for it. And as you say, is the other one is just how the handshake is required to make it all work, right? So, but I think at some point it's like anything. It's you can make if you have something and you can generate revenue, who's not going to want to generate revenue, right? To particularly to help offset the cost of whatever it is you've purchased. So, because you see it now, right? If I got a little tractor at home and I can use it to move snow for my neighbors and I charge them whatever, I will, right? So, yeah.
All the millions of ways, small and large, that people will, as you said, maximize, optimize, what they're giving, what they're getting, that kind of thing. On the business side, one of the first things we saw with our tour bus company in Vancouver is, well, we'll run one of our tours. We'll run it 1 hour earlier so that it finishes 1 hour earlier so that we can be back at base to sell the power.
Right.
And that's a business decision. People have many more creative thoughts on max optimizing. Yeah.
So the other problem I'm seeing, I see this more in Alberta. I have friends in Alberta that lives in very established neighborhoods, but the grid in the neighborhood isn't set up for them to be connected at all, even to plug an EV in. They're just already at the limits of their panels and their limit of the area, and it's all underground cabling. So Like one guy wanted to buy an EV, plug it in, and they said they were charging them an exorbitant amount of money to upgrade the system in order to upgrade his panel to get enough power. So I think that's going to be another problem, particularly in older established neighborhoods where the local grid isn't set up yet. So someone's going to have to cover that off as well. Because I don't think the local homeowner is going to want to pay for it.
That's not, and Steve, pipe in where I'm wrong here, but grid issue, there's typically a rating. You've got so much power to your house based on your use, and it's peak. But if you could double fix it by having that electric vehicle. In other words, if you aren't charging it, if you're only charging it from 10 at night till 7 in the morning, you're never going to overload the circuit. So it's not that they don't have enough electricity. It's when they calculate you're going to use it, which is an old calculation.
Some cases, it's also the houses and the panels, like these code issues as well. So based on the calculation to figure out the panel loading, to throw another 40 amps on there, it's just too much for the panel based on code right now. So they can't upgrade without doing a panel upgrade. So that's part of the problem with some of the old ones.
But if you're in that situation, you can buy a switch that won't let your car charge when you're running your dryer. So there are ways around it. And I think in utility tight neighborhoods like that, if you do slow charging of electric vehicles and the battery and allow the battery power to go back into the grid, and you have local solar, you could actually be gentler on the grid and do more. But True. I'd like to hear Steve Keogh's reflection on my assumption there. That would be great.
But the other part of that is like, that's hardware now. Who's covering the cost of that hardware, right? So as you get into new build, you just make it part of the building code, done, right? But when you're trying to retrofit, yeah, anyways.
But when you think of the EV owner, I have an old Nissan Leaf. The battery management system is not good on it. So my question would be, are the electrical transfer rates low enough kilowatts that it's not going to degrade my battery too badly? But I noticed, Robert, you're connected with Dalhousie, which I assume is Jeff Don's group, and they have been involved with testing a battery, a single crystal lithium ion battery, and I think it's 8 million kilometers to a 30% degradation. So if you have batteries like that, and if Donut Labs battery is real, you're never going to degrade the battery with your driving. The car is going to fall apart. So you may as well make money from the grid.
Yeah. It's like the old Dodge trucks with the Cumming engines. The truck was going to rust before the engine wears out. So if it's the case with the battery, I'll get as much out of that battery before the car rusts out on me. So.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what's on the road today, or now, again, it's the low-hanging fruits. It still works, and it's only going to get better. Like we have fun talking about all the new battery technology coming down the pipe, but that's probably another session for you guys. Sorry.
Other questions here?
I think, Steve, if you don't mind, come on. Maybe he's in the middle of dinner or something, but if you don't mind, it'd be interesting to. Where is the challenge that we were talking about if we're not that knowledgeable? Thanks, Steve.
Hey guys, what challenge are you talking about? From the grid point of view, or?
Well, he's bringing up that in some communities they won't. If someone wants to have an electric car, they'll say no, you can't have one, and you're not set up.
Yeah. Is that BC Hydro saying it, or is it some other authority saying no, you can't?
My story was in Alberta, so it was in Calgary and some larger homes that the neighborhood is pretty well limited out already. So I haven't heard a similar thing happening here in BC yet, but I wouldn't be surprised that some older neighborhoods have got that problem.
Yeah, it likely, likely there's obviously some areas where, a community is served by a single phase feeder, and it's quite at the end of the line and things like that. There's probably some limitations to that. Yeah, so there's all kinds of reasons why you can't put you can't put uh, a Tesla supercharger in there, right? Because it's just out of capacity.
Maybe my comment here when I hear that, thanks, Steve, that there's always exceptions, exemptions, exceptions. And,
Mhm.
I have to, and pretty quickly say, okay, that's not ready yet there. That won't work there. But boy, there's a lot here. So as I mentioned, I ran into this in West Coast Sightseeing. We have these, I mentioned, 2 electric tour buses. I think they go, 318 kilometers was the average max. So the company had, as I mentioned, 60 buses, and our tours were to Victoria all day long. It was a 1-day tour and overnight stuff. Victoria overnight, or it was hop on off around Vancouver, or tour city tours or North Shore. And then the last one would be Whistler. Whistler's like 15% of our total sales. And whenever I mentioned electrics, and how great they are, 9 times out of 10, someone said, but can you go to Whistler? I say, oh, not yet, but by the time I replace all my fleet, in the next 5 years, I will be able to, or I got to 85%. So, there will be a community in Alberta, and there'll be this, that, and the other thing, but there's this huge grid scale opportunity all of it.
Yeah, from from a program developer's point of view, right? The market can be broken up into segments, right? And some group of customers will be ready sooner than others, and so you would design a program so that it would scale, right, according to when the market is ready for it. So you certainly don't want to wait until everybody's ready and then launch a program. But then when you launch a program, you also, if you want to sort of grow as the market grows, then you design a program to be flexible, but you would target it accordingly, right? And you don't jump out and say, the market potential is 3.9 million vehicles, right? You don't do that. You go with who's ready first, and you do that. I mean, that's and only certain customers will be able to will it make sense for them, right? So then you build the business case based on that, and not for everyone, because if you try to do it for everyone, then your business case isn't going to work.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, Steve, maybe the other conversation and is how to understand better, that slide that showed that the kilowatt hour coming from a vehicle can be the lowest cost kilowatt hour, albeit, when and where, during those peak hours, lower than, it's a very imperfect study, which I'm willing to make, but lower than, paying for a utility, paying for solar, wind, or stationary storage.
I think I know what you're driving at, and I've always thought that VDG makes the most sense because the vehicle is pre-capitalized, right? The customer has already purchased the vehicle, and they're using it, and they've already justified and made a business case for buying a vehicle like that. But there's some flexibility and some capability left. That's left over that the customer isn't using, but it can benefit the grid. And that's how we want to sort of start from there and say, hey, you know what, if you have some capability, why don't you just do that for the fee? So then the incremental cost from the business point of view is quite small because they've already invested everything, right? So it's just that incremental cost. So then that cost to the utility is going to be quite low, and that's why it makes sense, right? And it makes less sense if the customer hasn't purchased a vehicle, right? And if they're relying on the utility to give them an incentive to buy the vehicle, then then your utility is expected to pay the most, right, that it can to make a business case, right? Do you understand what I mean? You know, that this means the utility will have to pay everything. You know, there's no margin for error, no margin for poor performance when it's not pre-capitalized. If the customer is waiting for the utility to provide incentive for them to make the business case, then you're expecting the utility to pay the most it can.
Yeah, I thought it's interesting that bar chart in the study it came from. You know, there aren't contracts typically out there for that. I think, you know, there may be time of use and that sort of thing, but that's not. Yeah, that's what's the word? I think scaling would suffer if there weren't contracts, because as a fleet operator, I have to buy a more expensive vehicle, and that means, you know, the bank, it has to be bankable. A time of use thing isn't as bankable or bankable at all. Yeah. Oh, it's a good, that's where I think we're co-creating this sort of thing to make it work for everyone. And yeah, moving forward.
How close are we to residential homes being able to have a vehicle to grid charger?
I'll start with this. Steve will have more information, but things I mentioned, you know, the standards and the codes, and even getting the vehicles. So both Steve and I have been working on getting OEMs or getting vehicles that can be put in homes, and then initially it's vehicle to home only behind the meter, just like that program you saw. So then the VG comes later, and back to the grid. You know, that's at least 12 to 18 months away, perhaps more. Steve, what's your thought there? It's a process that has to be tested and tried, and the equipment has to be available, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the situation's kind of fluid right now. Did you guys see the article from Ford and saying that they are going to discontinue the Ford 150 Lightning because, you know, it's just too expensive and they don't want to do that anymore. But they did signal that they want to build a cheaper one, right? A much less expensive truck that is going to also have sort of V2G capability. But that's, you know, a good 18 months away. So when do we think it's ready? It's about 18 months away, I think. There are some other products that are out there that we're starting to see in the market, but they haven't officially partnered up with any of the vehicle manufacturers. And unfortunately, the vehicle manufacturers aren't freely coming out and say, yeah, you know, no problem, use it on my vehicle and there's no, you know, everything is good. And it's because, you know, it's kind of a business for them, right? They want to make sure that they control how it's developed and how it's used, and how much, I guess, money they can make from it. And so we're waiting for sort of bigger manufacturers of EVSCs to come out and actually have the customers, have the OEMs to partner up with. We know Wallbox is coming out, and Wallbox has been working with Kia and Hyundai, right? But just waiting for that to do. I know that Ford has partnered up with Sunrun, and Sunrun has no interest in coming to Canada. So we're sort of locked out of the Ford market right now. And who knows what the new iteration of Ford cheaper version is going to be. Sounds like they may be open to working with other charging companies to make it happen, but we'll have to wait and see. So the vehicle to home market is still in a state of flux right now. I mean, we have vehicles. I mean, we have chargers that we're going to test that supposedly work with different manufacturers, but the manufacturers aren't stepping up to say that, we approve it, right? So everything is sort of testing and bring your vehicle to my pilot to test at your own risk kind of a thing. And if you are, we'll do our best to manage and control the testing, but no OEM is stepping forward and saying, go ahead, any of the vehicles from our company is going to be okay. Right.
So assuming there was a number of vehicle to grid charging stations that homeowners could buy today, can we just install them and send power to the grid, or what does BC Hydro require us to do?
Steve, I'm shaking my head.
What sort of cost is involved to do the next step?
Am I shaking my head fast enough, Steve?
No, you know what?
Just to do.
We're going to test it. We have a unit that we're going to test. It's going to take me, at least 6 months to test it.
No, but he's talking about him. Like, if he could get a charger, can he go?
No,
I know. Right now,
he can buy it.
I'm
looking
at down the road. As soon as that home technology is available, what's the cost? What's the hurdles to actually make it work with BC Hydro?
Well, Doug, it's not a BC Hydro thing, but you can buy one right now. I know. I bought one. I got one. Right? I got one. It's $10,000. You can go get one. $10,000, right? And it says that it can work with many different vehicles, right? So maybe it'll work with your Nissan Leaf, but I don't think so, because I think all the newer ones they don't have the CHAdeMO connectors, right? It's all CCS or NACS. So you can buy one and it'll cost you another 10 grand to get it installed so that it can backfeed into your house.
He said V2G.
Or V2H, right?
Oh, but there's a big difference, I'm sure. V2H, I go, yes, absolutely. V2G.
Well, V2G, when you say V2G, do you mean like a charger that's connected to a tower out in the field somewhere? Not really.
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking maybe a 50 amp level 2 charging station that's vehicle to grid, smart connected to BC Hydro. And when you want to do a peak power event, when you have an issue, you can actually draw power out of my battery. I've signed a contract, said, yep, use my battery.
Yeah, I mean, we have our net metering program, our self-generation program, right? That has solar and it can inject into our grid. And then, you could even have a battery backup to that, right? So, that setup is very close to what you're talking about already, Doug. Is like, yeah, you know what? Whether your solar is charging your battery and then now your battery is discharging back into the grid, as opposed to your solar is charging your vehicle and then your vehicle battery discharging in the grid. That's very, very similar. So in our solar program or self-generation program allows up to 100 kilowatt, right? And that's a lot bigger than your Nissan Leaf.
Mm-hmm.
The connection I'm bringing to this is right now, people can get a $5,000 rebate if they install a Powerwall battery in their house. So it's about $20,000 is what I heard to put a 10 kilowatt battery into my house, get it all wired in. I would rather put the $20,000 into a larger battery. Now, would BC Hydro be willing to pay the $5,000 to help me do vehicle to grid? And now you have access to 20 to 200 kilowatts for my battery, my vehicle battery, rather than just the 10 kilowatts from my home battery. I think you're getting access to a lot more.
Yeah, I think in the future we definitely would, right? I mean, it's we don't, in my point of view, we don't care whether your battery is in your car or attached to your wall, so long as we can get access to it to support our grid when we need it, then it has the same value.
Yeah.
Right.
Other questions or?
I think one thing, can we do it? When can we do it? And I think part of there is there should be program market a hot thing, although that's where it more or less would be now. And you saw my question about doing vehicle to grid. There's obviously ways to work it around, none of which I think are off the shelf. In the Netherlands, there's a city Utrecht there, and they've claimed, and they are planning to be the first bidirectional city in the world. And part of that program is a partnership with Renault, so this is where the OEMs come in, to about 500, like a moto program, a car share program. So all the car shares will be, set up bidirectionally. And as you can imagine, because we do, one of the groups we talk to here is Moto. They have thousands, 1,000 vehicles here in Vancouver. They know generally the use, like not generally, quite in detail, but in an aggregate, the use and when those vehicles are parked. And again, you add up, okay, 1,000 60 kilowatt hour batteries at Moto, and you say, well, at some point of the day, there's probably 80% of them parked during the day. They're mostly used mornings. And let's say, again, take your 40% thing times 60 kilowatt hours times 1,000. When those are all electric and bidirectional parked, there's a period of the day that can, they can be giving power back as part of the grid. Anyway, that's what Utrecht is doing with 500 vehicles. They have implemented more.
I know that BYD and Lion was mentioned. I've missed a few meetings, or quite a few, but I know I've heard talk about, like with BYD, because of the Chinese technology. I've heard of possibility of kill switches and other ways to kind of spy on us. So is there a way to overcome that or deal with that?
That's why Huawei, and you're really, Huawei equipment is not used by what do they call them, the Five Eyes or whatever. But, it's hard to know. I have no answer for that. You're the first one that's brought that kind of thing up, so thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's other companies that will do the same, North American companies as well. So.
Okay.
Okay.
There's always an inherent risk with new technology, right? We don't know what we don't know, and
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap it up with this. Oops, I'll get myself back in the screen. Thank you very much, Robert and Steve, for being a guest appearance this time and for your expert presentation last month, which Robert was the guest expert too. We've learned a lot, and I see a lot of potential with vehicle to grid, and I thank both of you for leading the way with the technology in British Columbia. And please keep us posted.
Thank you for your interest, and yeah, I appreciate it because the questions I always learn. So thanks for your interest.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.